What is going on, and welcome to another episode of the Time Killers Podcast, a show about games, movies, and everything we kill time with. My name is Neil Rivera, and I'm once again killing time with a man who is having conversations with the thoughts in his own head. It's Matthew Field.
Political conversations, especially.
Those are the best kind to have, man.
Yeah.
How has the internal monologue been treating you? This is, of course, in reference to you playing through both Zero Parades for Dead Spies and Esoteric Ebb, the two latest disco likes. How they been treating you?
They've been treating me well. Yeah, I mean, I've been enjoying them.
We're going to talk all about that, Matthew's thoughts on both of those games, and even give you guys a little bit of a rundown of what a disco-like even is for the uninitiated. But before we jump into that, I want to remind you guys that you can catch up on past episodes and find us on your social network of choice over at timekillerspod.com. Don't forget that you can DM us your questions, comments, and hot takes. We'll read our favorites here on the show. And if you are listening to us here on a podcast service or on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to us and leave us a review, and we greatly appreciate it. All right, Matthew, like I said, you've been playing through both Zero Parades for Dead Spies, which is a I would say more direct spiritual successor to the hit CRPG Disco Elysium, and then also Esoteric Ebb, which is also more of I guess a spin-off or like an alternative take on the genre as well. But before we jump into your thoughts on those two games, I really wanted to give an introduction into this idea of what a disco-like is, right? Like Disco Elysium came out few years ago at this point. It very critically well acclaimed. It sold over 5 million units, so it's very much a well-known quantity. But now we're kind of living in the aftermath of that, where we're starting to see both spiritual successors from the studio that created Disco Elysium, and then also creators and studios who've been inspired by it. So, I've kind of spoiled it here, but Matthew, where did the term disco-like come from? Why did we start calling these games disco likes?
Yeah, so I mean, disco like, it refers to, of course, Disco Elysium, which now at this point, about 7 years on from its original release, I think you can call it a bona fide classic at this point. I think it's earned that reputation. And yeah, just like you have Dark Souls, that's kind of or Demon Souls, that kind of coined the Souls-like genre that spawned from it. There's an increasing number of games that are sort of in the mold of Disco Elysium, or at least the mold that it kind of popularized. And the term disco-like is becoming more and more prevalent, and I think we're going to see an increasing number of games that can have that label in the next 2 to 3 years.
So, I dabbled a little bit with Disco Elysium. I didn't play through it entirely, but, played enough of it to get a sense of what it was going for. And it reminded me a lot of, and very much is inspired by, like, computer RPG games. I say that acronym, CRPGs. These, isometric point and click adventure, very text heavy, like RPG, very, role playing games in the true sense of the word. But I guess what in your mind made it so special that now we do have this sort of genre, with spiritual successors spawning, what elevated it beyond sort of like the run of the mill CRPGs in your mind?
So I think to answer that question, you have to look at what Disco Elysium did really well and what made it unique. So I think the number one aspect that Disco Elysium has is this. It kind of gets rid of the traditional like RPG stat points in favor of kind of like what they call like the thought cabinet, which is basically like the different voices in your head. Or the different perspectives that you can different mentalities that you can approach situations with. So like you may have one kind of voice that is I'm trying to think of an example, because the thing about it was Disco Elysium had a lot of these. I think it was something like it was over 20 20
Yeah, different
different.
personalities and
Yes.
traits and things like that. Yeah.
Like the one that I think is one of the more famous ones is called like Inland Empire, which is basically like interior thought and like awareness of like your place in the universe type thing, like very kind of you know, abstract concepts, and where
Hmm.
others were more like, you know, physical or violent, like your desire for violence or survival, or those kind of things. So like every different kind of little voice or aspect of your psyche, or anything that you're encoded to do has been given one of these voices that you can either put more stat points into, or um, ignore, and then you can choose to either listen to those to approach situations in the way that they would tell you to, or do the opposite, or ignore them completely. But it's just like a lot of character building, and a lot of like world building as well, because some of them will be like intellect, and it'll tell you more about like the place you're in or something like that. So it all amounts to quite a lot of dialogue, quite a lot of reading. But I think that is, if there was one main point that made Disco Elysium unique, I think that's probably it.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that stood out to me, was just the fact that it didn't have just the traditional run of the mill stats that you're boosting of like, yeah, I'm just increasing my strength and my hit points and my, like if I want to spec into, like thought or whatever, whatever the different stand-ins for magic and agility would be. Yeah, they're very in depth, they're very thought provoking, inherently political as well. Like I think there's, a lot of theirs, like that, like relate to just the politics of the world that they're trying to, convey here as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of a good segue into what makes a good disco like. So, we're talking, we're gonna talk about Zero Parade and Esoteric Ebb, and, presumably part of that conversation is going to revolve around like how close they come to nailing this sort of formula that Disco Elysium introduced or popularized. So, walk me through that formula. What do you think in your mind, based on Disco Elysium and your time with these two games? What makes a disco like, and what makes a good one?
Yeah. So I think to be a disco like, you have to have that interior dialogue, like I was just saying. Like that's the number one thing. I think you can play with the other aspects of it a lot, but that's the one thing you have to have. Um, the other thing that all both Disco Elysium and the two games were the two more recent games that we're talking about are like a political mindedness to them.
Hmm.
I don't think that is necessarily required. I think that has been done in these, and they've all done them in interesting ways. But I like, if we're going to see like this genre kind of explode and get adapted to a bunch of different things, I would not consider that like an inherent requirement. And I think some people may disagree with me on that, but I think I think the political aspects of this is just it's a subcomponent of the interior dialogue. Obviously, it comes out in the plot and stuff as well, but I think depending on the nature of the plot that the game is exploring, um, you can get away without politics, being such a major component of it.
Yeah.
Um,
So you talk about like the interior dialogue and walk me through that. Like, we're literally having conversations with yourself, but like, I mean, like talk me through, like, is that like, I mean, that's obviously like a huge part of the game. Like, what, like, how does like the Disco Elysium and these other games, like, how do they play with that?
Yeah, I mean, they all have like some form of you talking to yourself, and where when you're talking to another character in the world, you'll be getting these like interjections essentially in the dialogue where like after the person says something or after you say something, one of your personas, for lack of a better word, will like chime in and like provide commentary on what you or they said, like like either making a joke about it, or like thinking that they're lying, or providing extra context for you. And then in some cases you may even be able to like extend that interior thought and like chat with that interior persona to explore it even further. But it's essentially what's happening in the background here is that um, you have like your stat for each of these different psyche components are like there's always passive checks being checked. So like you may pass or fail checks that are happening, and if you succeed, you may get that dialogue. If you fail, it may say something like nonsensical or doesn't make sense. And it's all just happening like just in the background while you're having conversation.
Yeah, so and that kind of touches on my next question was like, obviously there's a lot of dialogue, it's text heavy, you're doing a lot of reading, but like is there any gameplay? What is the gameplay like? You mentioned there's these dice rolls that are kind of always happening. Talk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, that's another big aspect here, which I think is I don't know. I would say this is an important component, which is that there is no sort of traditional combat in these games. There's no like you're not upgraded, you're not getting new weapons or going out to like farm experience, or engage in what you would consider like a traditional CRPG combat. Nothing like Baldur's Gate or anything like that.
Right.
There may be some like scripted segments where there is combat, but it's all done through the same dialogue option branching that you would have a conversation in. Um,
Hmm.
so as far as action, like there's not really a lot. I would say that Zero Parade's probably maybe Esoteric Ebb, depending on what you classify as action. But I think Disco Elysium, I think, had maybe like one combat section that I can recall throughout the entire game, like one or two. And maybe there was maybe like an optional one that could have evolved or devolved into combat if you picked the wrong options. But you generally are not like shooting the gun very much, or like killing people or anything like that. A lot of it is
Right.
the ways that you're interacting with the environment. A lot of it's done through dialogue with the characters, clicking on objects, exploring, and kind of taking a more slower paced approach to like finding the way through the story.
Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, clearly there. I mean, it really like when we talk through about these, and when I've played what I've played and seen what I've seen of these, really like I understand why they're getting more popular and why Disco Elysium had the success it did, because I look at things like Critical Role, Dimension 20, the rise or sort of the return of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs. This almost fills that similar niche where it is kind of just like it's sort of simulating a dungeon master sitting across the table from you and just sort of having a conversation with you, rolling dice and walking you through a story and like giving you choices as far as like how you want to proceed and going from there. Is there anything that you can speak to there as far as like the comparisons to like TTRPGs and things like that?
Yeah, it's very clever because it is done in a way that is like TTRPG adjacent, especially with the dice rolls being the most obvious aspect. But it's also done in a way where it's like you couldn't exactly replicate this on a tabletop. The way there's so many passive checks constantly being done,
Right.
and it just like it interjects with the thoughts constantly. Like it would be way too cumbersome to have this done like by a DM or somebody, especially when there's other people at the table. So I'd be curious. I think I'm not sure if they made a Disco Elysium um, rule set or anything, but
Editor Neil here. Just wanted to jump in and let you guys know that I did look this up while we were recording, and while there hasn't been an official release for a TTRPG based on Disco Elysium, there are quite a few independent stabs at it. So there's a few itch.io links that I'm going to drop in the description of this episode if you're interested in checking out a TTRPG take on Disco Elysium. All right, back to the show.
I'd be like, there is something here, like you could maybe adapt it for the tabletop, but I think one of the clever things is that this is a sort of system and medium where or it has to be done in the video game medium, at least as it's currently deployed, which I think is one of the unique aspects about it. It's like half visual novel, half tabletop RPG. Combined with like the CRPG, isometric exploration. It's kind of a simple combination that makes you wonder how it hadn't been done so well, or like it hadn't really been done like this before. But I think by stripping out the combat and adding in really, really sharp writing, which I think is an important thing here. Like, you can have tons and tons of writing, but if it's not good or interesting, then it's just not gonna it's not gonna work. It's that you're not gonna stick the landing. And that's one thing that Disco really did do well. And but yeah, I mean, it's overall it's a pretty, they're not doing anything complicated here. This is one where I feel like you're gonna get some solo devs, which Esoteric Ebb is not exactly a solo dev, but it's mostly one guy who made this game. And this is the kind of game where it's not super resource intensive to make a game like this, because it's mostly just dialogue, So there's some potential here for people who have bold ideas to deploy it in this sort of format.
Yeah, I mean, and so clearly Disco Elysium came through. It sold well, critical, like you said, a modern classic by all accounts. And it didn't end up happily, really, for Zaum, the studio that developed and published it. There was a little bit of drama sort of at the end of this. Can you walk me through what happened in the aftermath of Disco Elysium and like where that left Zaum and like sort of the state of their next game?
Yeah. So there's a real complicated sort of situation that, a lot of legal issues and arguments between the creators of the game and the founders of the studio, which there's a bunch of YouTube videos and documentaries that you can go if you want to get the full lowdown here. But essentially, it didn't go well. There were supposed to be some like a spinoff and a sequel and maybe one other project that Zaum was going to work on and capitalize on the success of Disco Elysium. But essentially, like with the founder or with the creator of Disco Elysium leaving, they ended up canceling all those projects related to it and just kind of shelving the series. And once that was done, they only had one other project that was in active development, and that is what ultimately ended up being Zero Parades. So whether they will ever get another Disco Elysium or something like truly in that same universe, I would bet that we would eventually. But who makes it, and whether it's any good, I think that it's going to be tough. Like, it's got such a devoted fan base. I think it's going to be a tough sell to make one of those without the blessing of of Robert Kurvitz, the original creator. And I think right now that's a long way off from happening. So never say never, but I would not expect a true Disco Elysium sequel anytime soon. But it does appear that Zaum still has enough people there, enough writers to make one of these games successfully.
Yeah, and I mean, so that leads us, I think you teed us up nicely for our conversation about Zero Parades for Dead Spies. That is the follow-up to Disco Elysium, developed and published by Zaum, released earlier this year on May 21st. It's available on PS5 and PC and via the cloud, via GeForce Now. And yeah, so Matthew, you have played through Zero Parades. Are you done with it? Did you beat it, or where are you at entirely?
I have, yes, I finished it. I did finish Zero Parades.
So yeah, talk me through Zero Parades. Is it the spiritual successor to Disco Elysium that we've all wanted? Is it worthy of the Zaum name? Talk me through it.
I was very impressed with Zero Parades. This kind of had my number from the beginning, given that it's like more of an espionage feel to Disco Elysium's cop story. So I was already kind of in on this one, but yeah, I think they successfully adapted the formula that they kind of popularized in Disco Elysium. They fine-tuned it a little bit, stripping things away, adding a few things, to fit the thematic elements for the espionage story that they were telling. And then they just, despite I think all of the original writers of Disco Elysium no longer being there, whoever they hired nailed it. Like the writing here is super super good. Everything is top notch, and I was very impressed with the way it all came together.
Yeah, I guess to clarify here at the top, I dabbled a little bit with Zero Parades for Dead Spies. I don't think I've played enough of it to really like have formulated an opinion on it, but to sort of echo some of the things that you're saying and some of what we talked about previously with Disco Elysium, like the thing that really jumped out to me is just the world building that is going on here. And even though it isn't as action oriented as something like a Baldur's Gate, there is still so much world to take in, whether it is having conversations with the different inhabitants of the city that you're in. I think the game just does a wonderful job of just throwing you into the story, and just like immediately you're in like a really crappy situation and you have to navigate it and figure out like what's going on even. And I'm sure that plays even more into the sort of central themes of the unreliable narrator and things that I sort of got a taste of. Is there a lot of that going on? I imagine that was also sort of like a key feature of Disco Elysium, but I imagine that's also present here. Can you talk me through like the narrator and the main character, so to speak?
Yeah, we didn't talk about the narrator. Like I don't even know it is like an omniscient kind of like voice that is like the voice actor for it is like kind of unsettling. It was that way in Disco Elysium too.
Yeah.
I honestly am not. I don't know that they needed to stick that closely to that particular element of Disco Elysium. But it works. I mean, it's not a problem for me. But yeah, you part of the like I think one issue with all of these games is that there's a lot of like crunchy dialogue and like world building, a lot of proper nouns that have to be introduced at the beginning of these games. And I think they all do it like to varying degrees of success. I think Zero Parades does stumble a little bit in that early on because they are throwing so many proper nouns at you that without any kind of explanation of what they are, whether they're even relevant to what you're doing. And that's a limitation of this format because, they all have to build and establish this broader world that you are a part of. But all these games, I guess one thing we didn't talk about is that they all only take place in like one city. You're not fast traveling like other sides of the world. It's very localized into one spot, even though people are going to be talking about things that are happening, far away or throughout history or whatever. So you have to do a lot of imagining versus seeing, and so yeah, that is an issue here. I did have a little bit of a problem, like basically just getting my feet underneath me at the beginning of this game. Some of that might have been intentional, but yeah, that was one little nitpick I had with it. But once you understand the foundation, who the major players are, the major factions, the major countries. Yeah, it all just kind of hums together and sings and takes you on a really interesting narrative ride.
Yeah, talk me through that story without spoilers, of course. Like, is it clearly, like, I think you feel pretty strongly. Is there anything you can talk about the story specifically?
Oh man, I think, yeah, I don't want to give too much away. I mean, like I said, it's an espionage story. Um, it the themes and some of the things that it goes for here are very uncommon, and it does it with like uncommon, like an uncommonly deft hand. I think it handles things like one of the major themes here is like the nature of replayability and like
Hmm.
authenticity in terms of like music and also like the human experience. Maybe you can even like extend that into like the current AI conversations that we're having right now. And it has commentary on like, you know, the nature of like CDs and physical media versus like any the experiences that you get from listening to things or watching things, the power that media has over our lives, and like it's even hard to talk about this kind of stuff because it's all like experiential, you know, like everybody's going to bring in
Hmm. Hmm.
their own background with those things to the game. So I think, you know, and it also talks about the way those things can be weaponized by governments and by bad actors and you know, whoever. And it all does it with like kind of a pseudo sci-fi twist to it, which it's just really clever and really interesting and novel the way that they kind of intertwine all of these things.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is, I'm pleased to hear that they nailed this one. Obviously, you hear a story about like what happened in the aftermath of Disco Elysium, and it's hard to have faith that any sort of successor coming from the same studio is going to hit the same heights. And it seems like, despite some stumbles they have here. One last question I have before we move on to the sort of, outside sources that are taking up the disco like mantle. Did you get the sense that you were playing, while you were playing Zero Parades, that Zaum was really trying to be intentional about doing something different, or did they play it safe, quote unquote?
Yeah, I think if I had to guess, I think they felt a little bit of pressure to stay close to what Disco did. I think most of it feels natural. I think some of it feels like they could have strayed further away, but didn't want to.
Yeah.
Specifically with some of the political angles of this, like, I don't know, like some of it works with the way that there's different like countries involved in certain actions or motivations that's taking place, but you know there are some other like kind of more casual and like less um like some stuff on the side, not related to the main plot, that feels a little bit unnecessary, that just kind of was like, oh, like we heard you like politics, you know, we got some more of that discussion
Mm,
for you here, you know, type thing. um
gotcha.
I think it's better when it kind of uses the politics that are inherent in like spycraft and things like that, versus like getting really explicit with political factions and things like that.
Gotcha. Well, hey, that is Zero Parades for Dead Spies. If you are a fan of Disco Elysium, definitely sounds like it's something you should give it a try. And if you're a fan of espionage and narrative games, it seems like another winner as well. Moving on, before we completely leave disco likes in the dust, there's another one that came out this year. It's Esoteric Ebb. This is developed by Christopher Bodegard. It's published by Raw Fury, released earlier this year in March, and it's PC only. So this one is interesting because it's, kind of the same format and formula that we've described here. Narrative, CRPG inspired. You're having conversations in your head. But the two things that stick out to me when you will look at Esoteric Ebb is the art style and the fact that it's a little bit wackier and lighter. So this one, as far as I understand, this one is heavily inspired by Shakespearean works. So it's a lot more colorful, a lot more silly, a lot more D&D inspired as well. So instead of like having those like really like intricate and layered skills that something like Zero Parades or Disco Elysium has, it is sticking to the more traditional D&D class skills. So yeah, Matthew, you're not quite done with this one, but you're still playing through it. Give me your kind of top level thoughts on Esoteric Ebb so far.
So far, I like it. I mean, coming right off of Zero Parades and playing this is a bit tough for it, considering how much I like Zero Parades. I think some of the issues that I have with it are related to it being, a disco like, and others I think are just kind of unrelated to its genre and more just the way that the game is specifically. I talked about with Zero Parades, like how at the beginning you have to kind of digest a lot of proper nouns and kind of figure out the setting and get used to everything and let the world build itself, essentially. I found that to be a bit harder in Esoteric Ebb. I think there are even more proper nouns here. And the world, like they go into more depth into the way the world works because it's less like our own world. Like in both Disco and Zero Parades, the world may have some weirdness to it. There may be like some vague mystical elements, but it's mostly like our modern world or something similar to it. Whereas Esoteric Ebb is like it's like a pocket dimension or something, where the world, like the rules of the universe, don't exactly apply. Like it's not. I don't think it's a. You're not on a globe. It's like on two different planes that are next to each other, and get like wrapping my head around the way that like not only the different eras that have led to the era that you're currently in are set up and all the different gods and like major figures that have gotten you here, figuring out where like different cities are and different like biomes that they refer to here. It's just been a really like a lot to take in, and I feel like that's been a bit too much friction for me at this point. I think they might have gone a little too far in the direction of like lore dumping here at the beginning. So that's
One thing I never
yeah.
One thing I never asked, at any point in our conversation is like, is there any sort of codex system, any sort of reference system that you can go back and like sort of review what you've learned and things like that? And is that something that Esoteric Ebb maybe doesn't do as well? Or can you talk us through that a little bit, just kind of across the board?
So ironically, Esoteric Ebb is the only one of these three, if I'm remembering correctly, that does actually have a like glossary type thing where you can reference proper nouns that you've explored in conversation before, which I have used a few times, but it's also it's unfortunately not something that you can reference while you're in a conversation with somebody else. Like you have to have access. You have to not be in a conversation to be able to access like your inventory and like quest log and stuff. And that's where it is. So like if somebody has like mentioned something in a dialogue, I can't just immediately go and like look it up, which is when it would be relevant to use. So that's one kind of thing that's a bummer about the way that it's deployed there, because I do agree that like I wish both Disco and Zero Parades had a glossary like this where you could look up, who the major players are and things about them and stuff. But Esoteric Ebb only got half the way there, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I mean, talk us through like like how are you feeling about like the art style, the tone? Like clearly it's a little bit sillier, probably a little bit less serious. So yeah, what do you make of that compared to like I guess the more serious, like heavy, darker nature of the Zaum games?
The tone is nice, and I actually really like that they didn't feel the need to try to replicate the tone of the Zaum games. It kind of reads like a Terry Pratchett novel, like Discworld. I don't know if you ever read any of those or are familiar with those,
Hmm.
but it's not that it's not like there's serious stuff going on here. Like it's not totally like a comedy or anything like that, but it's all done with a lightness to it, and like a tongue-in-cheek nature to a lot of the um to more dialogue. Like it's if I was going to summarize it, it's a little bit more clever in the way that it's like it
Yeah.
deploys humor. Um and that part is really working for me. I like the way that uh because I think one running theme throughout all these games is that your protagonist is maybe not the most competent at their job or whatever
Hmm.
they're tasked at doing. Um and in both Disco and Zero Parades, it alludes to that, but it then also requires you to be super competent, at certain things.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas like Esoteric Ebb, like it is a running joke that you are not very good, and your character can fully acknowledge that you're not very good at this. And I think there are like actual fail states that you can get in the game where it's just like, yeah, you weren't good enough and you died essentially, like basically like a tabletop um type uh ending for your character where you just completely fail to achieve the mission that you set out to accomplish.
I love that. And yeah, I mean, are there like fail states that like you're aware of in the other two games? Similar ones like that?
Yeah, I don't know about Disco. There are definitely a few like silly ones in Zero Parades that you can get, where it's like you probably know this is not going to work out in your favor, or like you have
Yeah.
to roll poorly and to make a bad decision in order to achieve this. And there's like no consequence to doing it. All these games you can like save scum, so like there's no risk in terms of like choosing an option and dying or whatever, other than just like getting a chuckle from it. But yeah, Zero Parades has a few that are in that arena. But Esoteric Abs is more of just like, yeah, everybody, like, you're asking a lot of like dumb questions to people, like things that you should know, what to do, but you're kind of at a loss, and you're having to. It acknowledges the fact that you're having to play a video game and gain knowledge in ways that if this was like real life, your character wouldn't have to do,
More fourth wall breaking, you'd say.
or maybe not fourth wall breaking, but it's like it acknowledges the fact that you are actually asking these things, that your character is that in real life they would not have to do. Um, but yeah, and like you have like another part of these games that you have a companion, or usually at least one companion that either follows you around constantly or is at least like nearby a lot in order to kind of bounce thoughts off of. Esoteric maybe deploys this the best of any of them, in that like you get this one goblin sidekick who's just like constantly like calling your bluff essentially. Like every time you make a dumb decision, he's like, no, you shouldn't do that type thing.
Yeah.
And it makes for some great moments. And like I could definitely see this, like of all these, I think maybe Esoteric Ebb would make for the best adaptation into like a movie or something, just because of the tone and the way that it
Yeah.
all comes across.
Matthew, before we move on to take a break, did you get anything from the D&D influence at all? Was it something that you felt like it added to the experience, it took away? Did you miss having those, like all of the more elaborate you know, skills to sort of build up in the Zaum games, or I guess talk us through like the D&D aspect before we go to break.
Yeah, so there's not really a large. I would not say this is like a big D&D influence, other than like there's the it uses, I think, some of the spells from D&D, like the way that you can like
Mm-hmm.
learn magic and stuff. This isn't like an official like Forgotten Realms universe or anything like that. Like it's unique. It's a unique setting. Um, so and it's got swords and magic. So like there's a little bit of D&D there, but like you could also compare it to a lot of other things. Overall, I would say it's nice. It's a nice change of pace from like the more modern settings and the other the Zaum games. I think that it like it just shows that you can adapt this kind of framework to any kind of setting or anything like that. I think I'm not personally like predisposed to liking the D&D sort of traditional fantasy setting as much as the modern setting, but I think it's deployed well here. I think it serves as a good backdrop for the type of humor and the story that they're telling here. So yeah, overall, I think it works. I wouldn't consider it like a home run, but it's a good angle for that they've explored here.
Well, that's Esoteric Ebb, everybody. Play it now, enjoy it, or play it now and enjoy Zero Parades for Dead Spies. You've got no shortage of disco likes that have sort of popped up and come out in the aftermath of Disco Elysium. If you're, like I said, a big fan of tabletop RPGs, if you want something that's going to give you that player and a GM kind of experience that tells like a really compelling story, based on what I've seen and definitely based on what I've heard in my conversation here with Matthew, like these seem to be some really cool games. And, I think for me, it's really going to come down to like finding the right story, the right setting. Like I'm not as big into the espionage for Zero Parades to hit as much, or like to see that through to the end. And I'm with you as well with Esoteric Ebb, where like while the art style grabs me and is really intriguing, I'm not as big on the more like high fantasy stuff. So maybe one of these will come out and it will be a setting and characters and everything that'll speak to me, and everything will kind of click into place. But until then, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to talk to you guys about Rhythm Heaven Groove. So stay right there. And we're back. Matthew, you've been the MVP of this episode, but it's my turn to talk and give your voice a chance to rest. Matthew, in case you guys didn't notice, Matthew is getting over a cold, so shout out to Matthew for essentially carrying us this episode and walking us through the disco-like genre. But enough about that. I've got cute rhythm microgames to talk to you guys about, because Rhythm Heaven Groove is out, and let me tell you, it's my new obsession. I've never played a Rhythm Heaven game before. This is a kind of a long-running franchise for Nintendo. So this is developed and published by Nintendo, so it's a Switch exclusive. The original, I believe, came out in 2006, the mid-2000s. It was a DS title. And so, it kind of started as this like offshoot of WarioWare. So if you're familiar with the WarioWare games that Nintendo develops and publishes, they're these just collection of micro games. So not mini games, but micro games. Each one takes like 2 to 4 seconds, and you're doing like a single action, pressing a single button, very quick. And it's really designed to like measure your reaction and response time. A lot of times those are very goofy, very silly. They have a really funny sense of humor. So that DNA sort of just transferred over to the Rhythm Heaven franchise, which it's essentially the same concept, the same premise, these really short micro games, but all of them are rhythm based. So instead of, doing things, having to like, navigate a cursor or, weird things in a short amount of time, everything's just to the beat of a song. Once again, the actions are very, very simple. You're usually only pressing one button at time. At most you're pressing 2 buttons in some sort sort of sequence. But where the game really ratchets things up is in the presentation and just how they use the simplicity to just mess with you. One example I'll throw out is there's a soccer mini game where the first game that you'll play is you're just kicking the ball to the beat, and all you got to do is hit A when the ball comes, and you hit it on beat, and you're good to go. As you do further stages, you're incorporating other things like chest bumps. You've got to hit it with your chest and then kick it, so you're adding multiple presses. But then once the game gets going, they start adding in just weird dialogue where like you're practicing in a park, and like the little girl is just like, "Oh, I think someone's watching me. This feels really weird." And like these like internal thought bubbles are just taking up, I'd say, a good third of the screen. So they're incredibly distracting, and it's all designed to get you to look away or like focus, not get your focus off of counting time. Because otherwise it would be a really easy game. Like you would not be mistaken or faulted if you played through the first like 2 or 3 stages and been like, oh, like this is like, I paid $40 for this, what is this? But the deeper you get into it, the more you sort of like, there's an easy to learn and difficult to master nature to it. And then of course you layer on the sort of silliness and the sense of humor, and it's really just a really good time. A lot of these mini games, like they have these audio cues. Everything's built around responding to a certain audio cue. And, we're a family of ADHD vocal stimmers. And let me tell you, we are going around saying poppy, pepo, poo, like all these weird noises to each other that are just essentially call and responses from Rhythm Heaven Groove. So overall, like I really, really recommend it. There's some things that, I will caveat. The biggest one is that you can play it handheld and docked on TV as well. It's essentially unplayable when you're playing it on a TV docked. It's it's got the usual rhythm calibration tool, and like all of it seems really nifty, but there's the games are so precise in how they measure you that even a little bit of latency just isn't gonna, like, you're just not gonna have a good time with it. And then, like a lot of the game is sort of built around going back and replaying things, mastering them, getting a perfect, getting a certain high score, hitting a certain score threshold. So like some of those first ones, like I mentioned, are a little too trivial to go back and replay and aren't as fun, but the ones at the end, I will say, are very, very fun, and I'm having a good time going back and replaying those. So this is one that's gonna kind of live on my Switch forever. Another thing to shout out is that it is a Nintendo Switch 1 and Nintendo Switch 2 game. So it's actually only a Nintendo Switch 1 version. There is no Nintendo Switch 2 version. It might actually be the last first party Nintendo game to be released on the Switch 1. It's certainly the last one on the calendar at the moment. So I recommend it. It's a good time. Like I said, it's gonna live on my Switch, I think, for the rest of the year and certainly well beyond that.
So I've never played one of these games, and I've never actually, I don't think I've ever really dug into like a WarioWare either. So my frame of reference here is lacking. Are you listening for purely like for like a pattern, or is this something like a Guitar Hero where you're going to be pressing buttons along with like a song or something, or is this purely like they're trying to trick you and you're just clicking when you hear a certain noise at an uneven interval or something like that, or does it vary?
It varies a little bit. The building blocks, each building block that the game gives you varies, but then you get to these sort of remix levels that they mix and match everything. And those, I would say, are the most comparable to like what you would traditionally call a traditional rhythm game, like a Guitar Hero, where there's some sort of song playing in the background that's pretty easy to identify. And then it's really just kind of cycling through the different micro games. And then as you're like, the way that they time. It's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, right? So you're hearing a song in the background. It's got a very easily identifiable rhythm for you to sort of latch onto and start counting out musically. But then the call and responses will come, like, it won't always come on the first beat of a measure. It may come on the second beat of a measure. It may come on an and. The more complicated ones will have you count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I'm a drummer, in case anyone didn't notice. So these games are very important to me. So they where they mix and match with the rhythm is not necessarily giving you thing on a note on the one beat. It's always, sometimes they mix it up, sometimes they throw, and I think that's where they have a lot of fun with it too, is because they'll, as you play through different micro games, they get progressively harder, and then they mix and match elements from all of them, right? So you may have the simple prompt from level 1, but then they'll throw in a prompt from level 3 to really throw you off your game. So there's it's simple, like each one is like, it's very easy to, like it would be reductive to say, like, you're just pressing one button, but the magic really happens where, like, how they mix it with the music as it's happening, and then like sort of plug and play the different games and what they're asking you to do with that.
So when you talk about like how this is unplayable on a television, is this, I was originally thinking that this was something where like the latency, because it's like so reaction based, would be too long, but this is actually more of just like a pure timing thing versus like reflex or reaction time. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, I would say almost to this game's credit, but also in to its detriment in this case, as it relates to the TV performance, it's very precise in how it detects, how accurate you are. And one way I can say that for certain is that the game will give you a response if you like flat out miss the note, and then it gives you a response if you like, are just a little off, and then it gives you another one if you're like just barely off. Like, so there's varying levels of like, and like everything's so reactive, the scenes that are playing out, like everything reacts to, when everything's designed around when you're supposed to hit that button, when you're supposed to hit it. So it gives you that feeling of satisfaction. But to its detriment on the TV, that you just don't get that same experience. So, it's yeah, like I think it's more in the timing aspect, and something about the latency is causing it, like, to register a little bit late in the game.
So my last question here, it relates to like, I guess the sort of presentation, or like the way the art style is. Going back again to Guitar Hero, like it's very clear visually when you're supposed to hit that Guitar Hero note, right? When it passes the bar, and you that's when you hit it. Whereas like looking at some of these mini games that this game has, is like there's like a lot of different visual styles, a lot of different cues that you're looking for to be happening. Does the sort of imprecise nature of the graphics and art style, does it ever get in the way of you knowing what you're supposed to be doing, or when exactly you're supposed to be doing it? Or is it all like simple enough to where like you there's never a question as to when you're supposed to actually hit the button?
Yeah, I think the people who are going to have the most trouble with it are those who are just not as musically inclined. I think I'm a little bit at an advantage because I'm a little bit more accustomed to counting rhythms and things like that. So I was able to sort of center everything that was happening visually around that. Another thing about this game is that you can essentially play it with your eyes closed, So like there were times where like the visuals did get, so it is, I almost call it like Guitar Hero without the note highway, right? Like the audio cues serve as like, okay, you got to do something now. And so like there are times where you're just sitting there tapping your feet and listening to the song, and then you'll hear a cue and like, okay, I got to do XYZ with this kind of timing. and you just kind of have to know it based on like, okay, you know, like a popular example that's making its way around social media is the dog that jumps up to catch the frisbee. Is, you know, you're counting two measures of a 4/4 beat, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, but they're asking you to hit the A button on 7. So it's like they mess with you, you know, as it relates to that. But yeah, like the visuals, they can be a little overwhelming and a little bit distracting, especially if you're not musically inclined. So one thing I will say that the game does well, and you know, like it kind of also contributes to that feeling of the games being a little easy, is that there's a tutorial at the beginning of every single micro game. So like they will load you up and they're saying like, okay, you know, here's the kind of beat that we're gonna play for you, you know, get used to like, or here's the thing that we're going to ask you to do, get used to swinging this hammer around, get used to kicking the ball, get used to jumping up and catching the frisbee. And then, you know, then they even have like, they include example videos of like how everything's supposed to look in sequence. So they really do tutorialize it in a way that makes it easy to where like, okay, I'm having a really hard time just figuring out visually how it's supposed to look. They give you like a little video, an example video to go and check out. So I think they do a decent enough job to make it, you know, the onboarding a little bit simpler. I think those first few games are very, very easy too. So, I mean, I think there's enough room there for someone who isn't quite musically inclined to get used to everything that's going on. But it is a little bit of a learning curve.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it looks cool. It looks like the presentation is well done. I guess would you say that like there's enough here to warrant the $40 for most folks, or is it this kind of just, should this just be relegated to, I shouldn't say relegated, should this be reserved for the people who are like true music aficionados like yourself, to really appreciate this?
I mean, I think there's enough here to justify it. You know, if you're somebody who is gonna like going back and replaying the, you know, I think there's enough incentive just in the presentation and the music itself to go back and replay some of these games over and over and over again. But they do a good job of incentivizing you to do that. One thing I will throw out, like the big carrot on the stick is the perfects. They sort of pick a stage at random that you're like, okay, now you have a chance to go for a perfect on this one. And they only give you 3 opportunities to do that. If you don't, it goes away. So it really adds that extra pressure when you're doing it. So that's one thing I'll shout out. But I mean, there's entirely separate game modes too. You know, I haven't even talked about like there's a whole RPG mode where, you know, you're going through these very simple dungeons and fighting monsters, and the battle system is different spells that have different input patterns that are all, you know, rhythm based. So, you know, you're eventually mixing in things like spell casting fire, you know, versus like a water spell that does more AoE damage versus like, you know, when do you heal yourself? So it did a good job of like still playing with the rhythm elements, but then with something a little bit more complicated, like an RPG style combat. There's also multiplayer stuff. I didn't really play a whole lot of that, you know, mainly because it would necessitate playing on the TV. So, you know, I can't imagine that those would have been a ton of fun for us. But yeah, I mean, I think for $40, I think it's a really good value. Yeah, I mean, I was actually kind of impressed and surprised at how much there was in the box.
Well, cool. Yeah, I mean, this looks certainly unique. You know, like I said, there's been a few of these. It's been a long running series, but it doesn't look like there's not that many. You know, we don't get one of these very often. But yeah, I mean, it looks like this is a pretty cool thing, and it seems like it's got a very you know, dedicated fan base that enjoys these. So I may check this out.
Yeah, they got a new fan in me. If, you know, all they really had to tell me was WarioWare with rhythm, and I would have been a lot sooner. So, but I will absolutely be picking up every single one of these moving forward. And speaking of moving forward, we're going to move on forward and leave you before we go log off into the good night. I don't know where I was going with that one, but we're gonna end this show. We want to thank you guys for listening to us drone on about video games. Just as a quick reminder, you can listen to past episodes and find us on your social network of choice at timekillerspod.com. Don't forget, DM us your questions, your comments, and hot takes. Let us know what you thought about our disco-like conversation. If you've played a disco-like, and if you're gonna try one now, I definitely am more interested in trying Zero Parades, or playing through something like that now after hearing Matthew talk about it. Once again, if you're listening to us on a podcast service, don't forget to subscribe to us and leave us a review. Every little bit helps and gets us noticed and helps us find more people to listen to the show. With that, guys, we're going to let you go, and we'll see you on the next one.
Peace.